Hi everyone, Buyer's Agent Jay Pace here for Providence Property Group with a market update for the month that was March 2026. For those of you new to the channel, we are a national buyer's agency with offices in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth. We believe that there's always an opportunity somewhere, turning dreams into addresses. We help you to be a player and not a spectator in your wealth journey, focusing on quality properties over quantity. And operating through 3 decades now, our experience will ensure no sleepless nights worrying about property markets. On this channel, we talk about all things property, but most importantly, I read the news and separate the fact from the fiction so you don't have to. Let's get straight into it. So having a look at interest rates now, I remember when they were the topic of conversation all the time and then they stopped for a little while and now everyone's talking about the interest rates again. In the last meeting, the RBA increased interest rates by 25 basis points, up now at 4.1%. The word on the street is that we're probably going to get another 2 interest rate rises before the end of this year. It looks like the RBA is just itching to increase interest rates. I guess when all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like it's a nail. Just to give you a little bit more insight on that, interest rates are climbing in Australia, but across the majority of the OECDs or the European area, UK, Canada, the US and New Zealand, interest rates have actually dropped. So we are a little bit different here, and I guess we just have to change that when we go to vote next time. All right, let's have a look now at the market itself and the performance that we've seen over the last month. Really interesting numbers still. I just keep getting surprised by Perth, up 2.5% for the month again, which is crazy, followed by Brisbane at 1.8% and Darwin at 1.6%. So the best performer for the year, 24.3% from March 2025 to March 2026 is Perth. Then that's followed by Darwin at 19.7% and Brisbane at 19%. Again, if we take those median dwelling values on the far right-hand corner there, and then we times that by the percentage and divide it by 52, we can figure out the movement that we see over the weekly period of that market. Before we go into the next stage, I just want to let you know, Perth has now breached $1 million. And if we see this, Sydney is the most expensive at 1.3 million, let's call it, followed by Brisbane at 1.1, followed by Perth at 1.01 or 1.02. Then we've got Adelaide at $940,000, and then you've got Canberra at nearly 890,000, and then in 6th place, you've got Melbourne at 828. What a buying opportunity. Now, one of my favourite parts is looking at the speed of the market. So what we can see here is in alphabetical order, Adelaide a little bit faster than what it was last month, currently up $107,000 for the year or $2,100 per week. Brisbane, again, faster than the last month, up $4,000 per week, $209,000 increase over the last 12 months. Insane. Melbourne, like Sydney, with a negative quarter, it's had 2 months now where the market has gone backwards. And we're still in positive territory in regards to it making about $500 a week over the last 52 weeks, or $28,000 increase for the year, but we're still slowing down. Sydney as well, up $62,000 a year or $1,200 per week, and again, just slowing down. But the Perth market, absolutely shooting the lights out, up $4,800 per week. Now, I wanted to have a look at some quick headlines here. Australia's $133 billion property price slide rapidly becoming the worst in modern history. Australian home prices fall for 6 months in a row as interest rate rises bite. Australia's housing market could see a historic crash. Now, if you didn't look at when these were actually written, you'd think they were written today, because that is the sentiment that I'm seeing when I read any newspaper. But all of these actually come from 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. And I could fit dozens of these headlines on this slide. The reason I wanted to show you this is for this particular reason. In March 2019, which was 6 years prior to me doing this video, which I'm filming in April, but it's the March data. So 6 years ago, CoreLogic, or Cotality Today, put out this document. And they put out this document every single month, but this infographic they discontinued, but they've been doing it for quite a long time. And this shows you what was the median dwelling value for across the combined capital cities, across the capital cities 7 years ago, okay, basically. So we're just having a look now, and we can see the performance of that market and where they currently are. So you can pause this video and have a look in your own time, but I'm going to quickly click a button now and show you where it is today in the change. So Sydney was 782,000. It's now $1.295 million. Okay, that's up $513,000 or 66%. Melbourne was 624,000. It's now $828,000. That's up $204,000 or 33%. Brisbane was $490,000. Now it's $1.1 million. It's up $611,000 or 125%. Adelaide was $427,000. It's now $937,000. That's up 119% or $510,000. Perth was $443,000, now at $1,018,000. That's up $575K or 130%. Hobart up 61%, Darwin up 55%, Canberra up 50%, combined capital cities up 71%, combined regional areas up 101%. So all I'm saying is if you listened to the media, if you listened to those articles that were a dime dozen during 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, you would have missed out on everything. And the reason I say this is that these monkeys have the same hymn book that they sing from. It's going to be the same doom and gloom stuff that you're going to see in the paper. There's nothing you can control but your own life itself. So at the end of the day, it's up to you as to what you see that influences you. And I think, and I'm going to show you soon, why we are coming up to what's probably going to be the best buying opportunity in Australian history. Next, we're looking at dwelling applications. Again, this is really indicative of market values because what we're seeing here is the amount of properties that are being built. So Australia has recorded 196,491 dwelling approvals. Now that's 8.6% higher than the 12 months prior to this 12 months, but it is below the 240,000 annual target that is being implied by the Federal Housing Accord goal of 1.2 million homes. And that is what they promised to complete within 5 years up to 2029. Why is this such an important point? Because right now they're talking about legislation changes or policy changes in the new budget that they're going to announce in May. And a lot of that policy looks like it's going to discourage investors like you and I from buying properties. When investors leave the market, development applications drop, and then demand for product increases more and more from owner-occupiers, but also, more importantly, from renters. Okay, we can see here now the current total listings, 11.5% lower than what they were last year in March and 15.1% lower than what they were over the last 5 years as an average. We can see there the cities or the capital cities with the lowest amount or the biggest drops are places like Perth at 29%, Hobart at 29%, Darwin at 33.5%. So these are areas where obviously it's taking longer to buy and there's far less stock on the market. Now let's have a look at rental yields, because when interest rates go up, one of the first things people think about is how am I going to continue to pay for this property? And even though there's that narrative that, these greedy landlords increased their rent by $100 overnight to this unsuspecting, single mother, etc., whatever they can do to make it as sobby a story as possible. What they don't say is that the landlord had, especially as an example, during 2022 from May, we had 13 rate rises. So the landlord, let's say they just signed someone up in May, or let's say just the month before April, the landlord had to go through 13 rate rises almost and carry that burden for nearly 12 months potentially before they were able legally to increase the rent for that tenant. So they managed that burden during that entire time. So it's definitely not the landlord's fault that they're passing on that. Certainly there are cases where some people are very greedy, but at the end of the day, if they're that greedy, either someone's going to end up paying for it or that tenant is going to leave and go and find a more affordable property. But it's very interesting here because for the first time, Perth and Melbourne are now matching. Their rental yields are both at 3.7%, which outside of Hobart, Darwin and Canberra, three places that we do not recommend that you buy, Perth and Melbourne now have the highest percentage rental yields in Australia. Very interesting. Now let's have a look at that same cash flow that we typically look at every month, and I've just updated the data here. So again, 3.4% average rental yield, median dwelling value, $1,025,365. The rental income times the median dwelling value is about $34,500. On a current interest rate, and I increase this because typically I've had it at 6%, but I know rates are going up, so I put it at 6.5. You have a $66,648.72 interest component. So if we take that interest component minus that rental income, it leaves you with a deficit or a negatively geared property of $32,166.31, or $618.58 per week. Very important to understand what it is that your holding costs are before buying a property. Obviously, negative gearing comes into account there as well, but that's a separate conversation. We can talk about that later. I also haven't taken into account strata, insurance, maintenance, etc. Now looking at vacancy. And vacancy is also very indicative of property pricing, figuring out specific areas where the majority of properties are available and where they're not available, demand is high, supply is low, etc. Over the last 20 years, the average has been 2.7% nationally, and at the moment we are at 1.1%, with certain cities and suburbs below 0.5%, which is quite incredible. Let's talk about two topics now that are very, very important in the spotlight. That is negative gearing and capital gains tax. So we'll start with negative gearing. And what we're going to look at is what is negative gearing, what are the proposed changes to negative gearing, and what are some of the ways it might affect Aussies. All right, so let's have a quick look at negative gearing, what it is, so that you understand it from a high level. So an investor has an $80,000 income. So a person has an $80,000 income. Their rental property brings in 20 grand a year. Okay, that's the income that they receive. But after they paid rental management, interest, maintenance, strata, etc., the property actually ends up costing $25,000. So that holding cost creates a $5,000 net loss for that landlord. So they're actually losing $5 grand every single year in holding costs. We're not talking about capital growth, it's the holding cost of the asset. They're running at a loss, okay? That loss then actually gets deducted from that individual's personal income, their taxable income. So instead of them being taxed by the ATO at $80,000 a year, because they've had a $5,000 loss, they're not going to pay tax on money they didn't make. So they're actually going to get a $5,000 discount on their taxable income. So in the eyes of the ATO, this person is not making $80,000, they're actually only now making $75,000. And because they're getting taxed at a lower amount, this constitutes as a saving, okay, as a benefit to them. That's negative gearing. Now, the rumoured changes for negative gearing. What are they and what do they kind of look like going forward? All right, the rumour is, remember this is all speculative, but we will know in a couple of weeks' time in May. The rumour is that they're going to limit negative gearing to a maximum of 2 properties, 2 investment properties. Any property beyond number 2 that you own as an investment, negative gearing tax benefits will not be there. So the holding cost of those assets is all on you now to cash flow that yourself. I want to show you a quick historical fact that I think is very telling of what might come after this. I want to take you back in time, and these articles are from the 14th of March 1987 and also from 1985. And what happened is in 1985, the Hawke government at the time abolished negative gearing. They took it off the table. You couldn't use it anymore. Okay? In 1985, they took it away because people were worried that these greedy landlords were just taking advantage of tax, and this is why they were buying up all the properties and all the usual things people whinge about. Now, I'm not very sympathetic because of these reasons, and I'll go into them in a moment. Now, what ended up happening? What ended up happening was they took the benefits away from landlords, and those landlords stopped buying investment properties. When those landlords stopped buying investment properties, there was less property that was available for renters to live in. So what happened? The knock-on effect was instead of 20 people showing up to a for-lease open inspection property, you had 60 people show up to a for-lease open inspection property because there was less property available, less competition. And if there's less competition, what do you reckon happened to rents? They increased by about 30% in 2 years. So the same people that were shouting for the heads of landlords who were just so greedy and take so much advantage of the working class man, those same people went back to the bank on their knee, back to the government on their knees and said, please give them back their benefits so they start buying properties. Another interesting side note here is that the Australian government did not step in any way and say, don't worry, we're going to house all of you and we're going to build affordable housing, just like the Albanese government said that they were going to do, and just like the data is showing they can't reach that target. So what they did is, at the time, Paul Keating, who was soon to become Prime Minister, was actually the Treasurer. And Paul Keating turned around and said, we're actually going to flip this. So we're going to reverse the policy. It's not going to happen anymore. We're going to give negative gearing benefits back to Australian landlords. My prediction is if they do that again, because in 1985, 86 and 87, they didn't have the vacancy rate issues that we have today. They didn't have the skilled labour shortage issues that we have today. They didn't have the immigration policy that we have today. They didn't have the development application deficit that we have today. And they certainly did not have the same costs of build materials going through the roof since COVID that we had today. So if it took 2 years for them to reverse that policy last time, how long do you think it's going to take until people are on the streets screaming for blood to get the government to reverse its policy again? That's why I'm not stressed. If this gets passed, I'm not worried at all. Now, let's look at the effects of negative gearing. Based on recent ATO data, around 49% of the 2.26 million property investors in Australia negatively gear. 2.26 million investors out of about 27 plus million people in our country is actually not a lot, okay? So they're saying half of those people, or just less, 49% of those investors actually negatively gear. Why is that really important? Well, nearly 60% of those investors have taxable incomes of under $80,000. These are not rich people who are doing these investment strategies. These are just proactive, hardworking Australians that are saying, I am not putting my faith in the government to take care of me or my family at retirement. I'm going to do something about it for myself. And that's why I get so passionate about this and upset when I hear people talk bad about landlords, or they talk bad about the government giving too many benefits to them. It really isn't working like that. These are people that are trying to make an honest living and trying to make life easier for you. Yes, there's going to be a bad apple every now and then, but I'm just saying the data shows the majority of them are just hardworking Aussies. Now, I actually broke down this data to see if today they didn't grandfather it, if they just said, as of today, everyone that owns 3 or more properties, your negative gearing benefits are confiscated from you as of today. Okay? They're not going to do that. They'll grandfather it. I'm quite confident. But let's say they did it today. Almost 70% of Australians own a home. And according to the ATO, 30% of that 70% don't have a mortgage. Okay? They're paid off. My parents, your parents, my grandparents, etc. don't worry about interest rates. They're worried about petrol at the pump. They're worried about buying avocados and broccoli and how expensive that is. That's what's affecting them, not interest rates on their home. Approximately 2.245 million Australians owned at least one investment property. So according to the ATO, 71.48% of investors hold one property. That's a huge chunk of that percentage, just holding one. Look how much it drops. 18.86% of investors hold two properties. These people will not be affected by the limiting negative gearing changes, okay? Because they only own two properties. It's only if they owned a third property. Let's see how many people in Australia own 3 investment properties or more. 5.81% own 3. 2.11% own 4. 0.87% own 5. And 0.89% own 6 or more. Let's do some crazy numbers here because it seems like people in the government won't do it. Let's assume that entire number that percentage of people that own 3, 4, 5, 6 or more was put together. They represent about 217,000 investors. Okay? In the grand scheme of things, that's not a lot of people. Less than 250,000 Australians own 3 or more properties. Not a lot of people at all. Let's assume all of those people, even though it says only 49%, let's assume all of those people take advantage of negative gearing. Absolutely, they wouldn't be. You'd get people that would have inherited properties. That's how they make their money. They don't have any debt on them. But let's just assume 100% of them take advantage of negative gearing. If you were to take those people off the board, it's only 217,000 people. How would that affect policy, or how would that affect the property market for the better for those people looking for more affordable housing? The answer is it won't. Let's keep going. The effects of negative gearing changes. How is that going to affect things? Here are what I think is going to happen, and what most, I think, professionals also agree. First, we're going to get the storm before the storm. What am I saying here? If I tell you, as a member of our illustrious government, that we're making changes to negative gearing or capital gains tax, most likely what I'm going to do is not hit you with it and say, from today, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to say, from this date in the future, if you buy a property after this specific date, you will not receive these benefits going forward. It's called grandfathering, and they've done it in the past, okay? What do you think will happen if I tell you you've got 12 months to buy as many properties as you possibly can get your hands on before these new, very crippling policies come in to affect investment? You are going to get ready, get set, and run as fast as you can to the bank and then to the marketplace to buy as many properties as you can, so that once this policy comes into place, your properties are immune. That's what you're going to do. That is going to be the biggest rush to buying properties that we've probably seen in the last half century, since they changed capital gains tax back in 1985. That's what's going to happen. What's going to happen to lending? Well, after the policy's been done, and you can no longer take advantage of negative gearing for multiple properties, more than 2, banks are going to look at that and say, well, you can't service this as much because you're not getting those tax benefits. So your borrowing capacity will most likely drop. That's another thing. Property supply. Grandfathered investors will hold on to their properties for much longer rather than actually selling or reducing their transactions. So the amount of stock on the market is going to shrink even more than what it is today. Okay, and we're already in an area where we just don't have enough stock. Next, rents. Rents are expected to increase by 15 to 20 odd % in that 12 to 18 months afterwards, because there's going to be less people buying rental properties, which means less properties for people to rent in. That's what's most likely going to happen when it comes to the changes of negative gearing. Now let's have a look at capital gains tax. Now, capital gains tax is when you buy a property and the property makes $100,000 and you sell that property, after all of your costs, whatever the profit is that you've made, currently at the moment, the ATO taxes you 50% of that profit. So if you made $100,000, you pay tax on $50,000, and the other $50,000 profit you don't pay any tax on whatsoever. That's what CGT is. What are the rumoured changes? The rumoured changes is that they're thinking about dropping the CGT discount from 50% to 33% discount. Okay? So for someone on a top marginal tax rate of, let's say, 47%, it's actually closer to 52% after you put the Medicare levy and insurances on top, but let's say 47%, this represents about a 33% increase in the CGT that they'll end up paying on a property. It's quite significant. Now, what are the effects of capital gains tax going to be? Again, you'll get the storm before the storm, but the biggest issue is you're going to get people holding on for dear life. That's a crypto expression, good old hodl. So to make up for the additional hit to their profit, because they can't make as much profit because the increase to the decrease of the discount for capital gains tax, Owners will most likely hold onto their property for longer than the average, and that's to make up that difference. This is going to result in less sales and less available stock. Less sales also means less transactions. Less transactions actually means less stamp duty, or capital gains tax, and less stamp duty from people buying, which actually results in less tax and less money for our Australian government. Any way you slice it, this really does not make sense. And I'm very curious to see what happens in May when this budget is finally announced. But I think this is going to be the lead up to one of the greatest runs of people trying to buy as much property as they can get their little sticky fingers on before these policies come into place. And I don't have faith that policies like changes to negative gearing will even be long-term and stay. Before I go, I just wanted to say thank you. We are the Australian Small Business Champion Award finalists for 2026. It's always an honour to get votes for our clients and to see that back. We're very passionate about property here at Providence and helping people just make a better future for themselves and their family. We're very specific about what we don't buy, what we don't do, the type of product that we stay away from, the locations we stay away from. By sticking to those rules, we've been able to do this for over 20 years now and make people a lot of money. So thank you. It really means so much to us. Remember, we can't help you until you commit. And once you commit, we won't let you fail. We are bringing two things here. We're bringing your desire to build wealth and our 20 years of buying experience together here. And that's a winning combination. For more than 3 decades now, we've been helping people purchase property all over the country, helping Australians open a life of opportunities through real estate, giving them the future that they actually want. And we buy unique quality assets that appeal to much larger audiences of owner-occupiers, not just investors. We buy in the right capital cities at the right time, guided by the economic property cycle. And we buy the property which is uniquely suited to your situation, which will act as a springboard to your next wealth building stage. This is how top performers buy property. This is how they invest. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you again next month.